In 1955, Allen and Unwin published the third part of The Lord of the Rings, titled The Return of the King. Now, that title never really sat well with J.R.R. Tolkien. In fact, he thought that the third book should be called The War of the Ring. He didn't like the title The Return of the King because he said it tells the reader what happens. And to his defense, he's absolutely right. At the end of The Two Towers, we as the readers, we have no idea if Aragorn is going to return to Gondor, if he's going to reclaim the throne, if he's going to fulfill his destiny as the king. We don't know any of that. But the title, The Return of the King, makes it pretty clear what's going to happen. Well, ever since I heard that story, I've had a keen interest in the title of books. This book, the third book of The Wheel of Time, is called The Dragon Reborn. Now, I don't think that that's necessarily giving anything away, but it does imply that the 500 or 600 pages of this book are going to be primarily focused around one character, specifically Rand al'Thor. However, Rand is included in the first 1 or 2 chapters, and then we don't see or hear about Rand again until the very, very end of the book. I find the irony of this title simply beautiful, because Rand is a fascinating character. He's deep and he's got a lot of issues that he's trying to work through. You know that he's destined to go insane. He's a great character, but there are other characters in this story who are also fascinating. I think it would have been so easy for Robert Jordan to hyper-focus around Rand. I mean, if you have to pick a single main character out of all the many, many characters in this story, if you have to pick one as the main character, it's Rand. Obviously, it is Rand. So it would have been very easy for Jordan to just hyper-focus on Rand's story, give a little bit of context here and there and how other people are feeling about Rand, but not really explore their stories. What a mistake that would have been. And thank you to Robert Jordan for giving us like tens of thousands of pages of this story, most of which is filled up with other characters and how they're developing. So again, while some people might find it frustrating, I found this title to be absolutely beautiful in its irony. Now, in The Wheel of Time, we read over and over again about this great pattern that the wheel weaves. And the individual people, the individual characters, are likened unto threads in this great pattern. And some of those threads are stronger, some of them are more vital to the pattern, even so much so that they will pull and bend and influence other threads around them in order to create the pattern that the wheel is weaving. Well, as I mentioned before, we get a wonderful insight in this story into some of those other threads. We get to understand them and who they are and what their story is and what they're going to do to progress their own plot. What struggles and difficulties are they going to overcome? What strengths and weaknesses do they have? And what flavor do they add to the pattern? One character who is quickly becoming one of my favorites is Perrin Ibarra. One of the things that I like about Perrin is how simple and good he is. We get a glimpse of that in the beginning of this story. He talks about how he wants to go back and help Min get back to her simple, innocent, pure life. And I can't help but think that he's really trying to live vicariously a little through Min, that he knows he can't really go back right now to his simple life as a blacksmith or as a blacksmith's apprentice. And so he's trying to help other people return to their simple lives. I think it's just this sweet intention, and it gives us a great insight into the type of heart that Perrin has. At his core, he is simple and good. And I really like that about Perrin. But that simple innocence, that simple goodness, can also be described as a bit naive, a bit immature, a bit inexperienced. And we get a glimpse of that in the following passage. Perrin is talking to Moraine. This is after a little skirmish at the beginning of the book, and a woman that is with them dies. And Perrin is taking it pretty hard. Well, here's what Moraine has to say. As if he had spoken aloud, Moraine looked at him. The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, Perrin. I told you long ago that we were in a war. We cannot stop just because some of us may die. Any of us may die before it is done. Leia's weapons may not have been the same as yours, but she knew that when she became part of it. Perrin dropped his eyes. That's as may be, Aes Sedai, but I will never accept it the way you do. This is indicative of a larger theme of how these 5 kids from Emond's Field are maturing. They're coming from a life that's really very simple and very sweet and very naive is a harsh word to use. And they're encountering some of these people who have been in the real world a long time and have been hardened by their experiences in that real world. Moraine is one of those people. And admittedly, perhaps Moraine has allowed herself to become too hardened. In this example, maybe it is good for Perrin to look at the death of someone and take it hard. Maybe it's okay to let those heavy feelings be heavy. But maybe Moraine is right as well, that you are in a fight against evil. This is a war, and there will be casualties on both sides. Yeah, I listen to some history podcasts, and one of my favorite history buffs, I don't know if I can technically call him a historian, his name is Dan Carlin. And I heard him once talking about generals and the type of mentality that commanders have to have. Unfortunately, commanders have to be pretty cold, because if they're going to mourn the loss of every soldier, they are simply not going to have the capacity to properly assess the battlefield and strategize in a way that will ensure a victory. So they kind of have to be cold and calculating in how they are spending human lives. Well, maybe Perrin is going to have to take on a bit of that type of mentality. And Perrin is not the only example. So for the longest time, we've heard about how Nynaeve is pissed off at the Aes Sedai. She's upset that Moraine came into Emond's Field, and she's upset that certain friends are being manipulated by Moraine. And then she gets to the White Tower and she sees, oh, that's just how all Aes Sedai are. And so, understandably, she's thinking, when I become an Aes Sedai, I won't ever do any of those things. However, that comes from both her and Egwene and Elaine, to be honest. They're all thinking that, of when I become an Aes Sedai, I won't ever do those things. But we're already seeing them starting to make certain concessions. And the way I see that is they have this view of how the world should be. And then they are getting into situations where reality smacks them in the face. And that harsh reality is forcing them to make some concessions. They're beginning to see maybe there are certain times to not tell the full truth. Here's an example. Egwene has just been caught by Eleda doing something. I can't remember what, but she needed a good excuse. Egwene floundered for an answer that the Aes Sedai would accept. It was said that Eleda could hear a lie sometimes. It was Matt. He was very sick. She tried to choose her words carefully, to say nothing that was not true, yet give an impression far from the truth. Aes Sedai do it all the time. We brought him back to be healed. If he hadn't, he would die. The Amyrlin is going to heal him, I hope. She made herself continue to meet the red Aes Sedai's gaze, willed herself not to shift her feet guiltily. From Eleda's face, there was no way to tell whether she believed a word. Elaine is already starting to make some concessions. And rightfully so. She's had some bad experiences with Red Aja in the past. She is, I would say, justified in wanting to bend the truth a little bit as to avoid any further, let's say, unpleasant experiences. And speaking of Egwene and this innocence and how these characters who are young and pure and good and untainted by the world, talking about how they are maturing and how they're starting to see how harsh the real world can be. Egwene, again, gives us a beautiful illustration of how she is putting off that old, young, innocent Egwene and taking on an Egwene that admittedly is perhaps a bit more cold, a bit more realistic, but also more mature and more wise. She was certain what that meant, at least, or thought she was. It means I'm off hunting Black Aja, and I do not know what my dreams mean, or how to make the fool Terangriel do what it should, and I'm frightened, and homesick. For an instant, she thought how good it would be to have her mother send her up to bed, knowing everything would be better in the morning. Only Mother can't solve my problems for me anymore, and Father can't promise to chase away the monsters and make me believe it. I have to do it myself now. She's beginning to see. She's maturing. And with that, admittedly, comes a loss of innocence. But the reward, the wisdom, and the maturity is well worth the price. So I mentioned just a second ago the Black Aja, right? The Black Aja are Aes Sedai who have betrayed their oaths and sworn allegiance to the Dark One. They're not supposed to have existed now or ever, and the White Tower, all Aes Sedai, deny the existence of Black Aja. Well, after Elaine, Egwene, and Nynaeve are betrayed by Liandrin and sold off to the Senchan, essentially, it becomes painfully clear there are Black Aja. And since these girls have some experience with the Black Aja, they are sent to go and track down some of these Black Aja who have left the White Tower and have taken some artifacts with them. Well, the girls get word that the Amyrlin seat wants them to go down into the storerooms and to search through some of the belongings that these Black Aja have left behind, and to come and tell them of this message by the Amerlin seat. A girl named Elsie Greenwell shows up and leads them down into the storeroom. The girls come back and go and report to Swan Sanchez, the Amerlin seat. In short, quick sentences, Nynaeve told of the things they had found in the storeroom under the library, making it seem only she and Egwene had gone, and added the conclusions they had reached concerning them. She did not mention Egwene's dream, or whatever it had been. Egwene insisted it had been real, of Teller and Riad. Nor did she speak of the ter'angreal Varen had given Egwene. She could not make herself entirely trust the woman wearing the 7-striped stole, or any woman who could wear the shawl for that matter, and it seemed best to keep some things in reserve. When she was done, the Amerlin was silent so long that Nynaeve began to think the woman had not heard. She was about to repeat herself a little louder when the Amerlin finally spoke, still hardly moving her lips. "I sent no message, daughter. The things Liandrin and the others left were searched thoroughly and burned after nothing was found. No one would use Black Aja leavings. As for Elsie Greenwell, I remember the girl. She could have learned, had she applied herself, but all she wanted was to smile at the men in the warder's practice yard. Elsie Greenwell was put on a trading vessel and sent back to her mother 10 days ago." I love that part. I love these moments that kind of smack you from the side and totally blindside you. It felt like something was wrong there. I kept thinking when these girls were down in the storeroom, something was going to pop out. Maybe there was a Black Aja who stayed behind and they were going to ambush these girls or something. Now I don't really know what to think. If I had to guess, I would assume that it is Selene who took the form of Elsie Greenwell. I'm not sure, and I don't really know what Selene's powers are, but because she's an intriguing character and because I don't know hardly anything about her, in this weird situation, for some reason my mind goes to her and thinks, maybe it's that person who has weird special powers that I don't really understand and I don't know anything about. Maybe it's her. But speaking of Selene is a fantastic villain. My brother and I, we've talked in depth about what makes a great villain. There was a show we used to watch when we were growing up called Angry Beavers, and one of the characters used to dress up as a character named Baron McBad Beaver of Really Bad Things. And he was this beautiful villain character because he was bad just because he wanted to be bad. And there are many, many villains in books and comics and movies who are exactly that. They're evil bad guys just because they're evil bad guys. Bond villains are, almost all of them are this way. They're bad guys just because they want to be bad guys. Lex Luthor is a lot like that. Bad guy just because he wants to be a bad guy. And villains like that are so shallow, so vapid, so weak. They're hard to relate to. Not that you're necessarily looking to relate to a villain, but if you can understand where a bad guy is coming from, all of a sudden the emotions that you feel around that character become so much deeper. Speaking of villains, my brother loves to say, no one is the bad guy in their own story. So maybe take a character like Thanos. Thanos, in his mind, he's not the villain. Thanos is the hero. Thanos is the savior of the universe. Thanos is the only one who can see the great threat that the entire universe is under. That there is a limited amount of resources and there are too many creatures populating these worlds. And he is the only one who has the courage, maybe the audacity, to fix the problem, to step up and be the hero. Obviously, we don't see him like that because the means that he's using to achieve those ends are so wicked and so evil, so cruel. But because his intention is good, he's a more complex character. It's both easier and harder to hate him, and the depth of that hatred is greater. Well, Selene is a deep, complex villain. I loved so much that in this story we got a bit more context around who Selene is and what she's trying to accomplish, and I absolutely loved that her goals, they're still evil and still wicked and still wrong. She's still trying to take over the world, but she wants to do it with Rand. Her ends are actually the same as Balsamon's, but she's going about it in a different way and cutting him out entirely. Oh, I loved that. I thought that was just great, great character development, and it adds some depth and some complexity to that character. She's really in love with Rand. She's complex because she's really coming from a place of love, of genuine concern and affection for Rand, or Luce Theron Telamon, whatever name you want to give him. She's in love with the dragon. She's coming from a genuine, good place, but it's been twisted, and the ends are still wrong, and the means that she's using to accomplish those ends are wrong and twisted, but there is complexity to her character, and I absolutely love that about Selene. She is a fantastic villain so far. Well, finally, I'm not the only one who's confused. There were several parts in this story where characters were making wrong assumptions, where characters were getting little bits of information and coming to the wrong conclusions. So for instance, the White Cloaks are chasing after Perrin because they believe that he is a Dark Friend, and they'll stop at nothing to capture Perrin. Well, it's interesting as a reader to sit back and watch other people try and piece the puzzle together and come up with a conclusion that is so off the mark. It's entertaining, and I think it's a really clever writing tool. And speaking of misunderstandings, the Aes Sedai cannot help but cause misunderstandings because there are so many secrets. So many people are keeping secrets. I mean, Moraine and the Amyrlin Seat, they've got secrets from the girls. But Nynaeve, she's also got secrets that she's keeping from Egwene. Egwene has secrets that she's keeping from Elaine and from Nynaeve. Egwene has secrets that she's keeping from Moraine. And Moraine is keeping secrets from everybody. So needless to say, all of these secrets are causing a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of confusion as to who knows what we can say in front of certain people, what we can't say in front of others, what the lie is that we've already told to somebody, and we have to keep that going, even though we're in the presence of someone who does know the truth. It's confusing. Now, since we're back in the White Tower, let's talk about Mat for a second. I loved Mat's arc in this story. He gets back to the White Tower, they cure him and they separate the dagger from him, and then they essentially imprison him in the White Tower. It's almost like they're looking at Mat as like a man who can channel, like someone who needs to be stilled, I think is what they call it. But they just keep a close eye on him. And granted, it's kind of couched in this like, well, we're just looking to protect you. You need to heal. Which, admittedly, there's some truth there. Isn't that just the most Aes Sedai thing ever? there's some truth in that. Yeah, you probably do need to heal, but that's not really why we're keeping you here. So Matt escapes, and his escape is just riddled with this rich character development where we're starting to see him like getting lucky all the time, all over the place. I mean, he's gambling in halls, and we start to see, and he comes to realize, I'm more lucky when it's totally random. If he tries to kind of plot things out and kind of make some plans, things don't really work out in his favor. But when he's completely random, things tend to work out for him. I think maybe the reason why I liked this so much is that for the first 2 books, we really got a better understanding of who Rand is and who Perrin is. Both of their stories have developed quite a bit, or at least more than Matt's. I mean, I think there's still a lot of character development that has to go into both Perrin and Rand, but it's like we almost got nothing about Matt for 2 books, at least about what he can do, why is he important to the story, why is his thread unique. Well, finally, we get to the end of the story. It's a little bit Arthurian in that Rand goes into Tyr, into a section of the keep called the Stone of Tyr, and in the stone lies a sword that he pulls forth from the stone and fulfills yet another prophecy that he is the Dragon Reborn. And the whole Arthurian parallel did not bother me at all. In fact, it was only in retrospect that I thought, oh yeah, he's pulling a sword from a stone. Yeah. But I didn't get that sense. One thing that did cause me to pause a bit was yet another prophecy being fulfilled. So at the end of book 1, Rand goes and saves a whole bunch of Shienaran soldiers as they're battling some Trollocs, and if I'm remembering right, it was like he was in the sky as like this like burning flame, maybe in the form of a dragon or something. But he goes and he saves these Shienarans. Not to mention, traveling to the Eye of the World and killing one of the Forsaken, and all these other things. And I thought, great. It's obvious, it's painfully obvious, Rand is the dragon. But then in book 2, at the end of book 2, Rand battles Baltsaman in the sky. And, Matt blows the horn of Valir, and the heroes come and they confirm that Rand is the dragon. And I think, okay, and he gets these herons like branded onto his hands, and I think, okay, I get it. He's the dragon. I get it. And now again in book 3, we get Rand fulfilling yet another prophecy. He pulls forth the sword that is not a sword from the Stone of Tyr, Kalendor. Okay. And all these people in Tyr, they see him do it, and there are a whole bunch of ale there from the ale wastes, and I'll talk about that in another review. But he fulfills yet another prophecy, and I couldn't help but think, like, what is Jordan doing? I get it. He does not need to keep fulfilling all these prophecies. And then I thought, maybe Rand is fulfilling these prophecies for different groups, different nations, different peoples, so that all people throughout the entire world will know and recognize that Rand is the Dragon Reborn.